"You need to leave, ma'am. This is a private resort." That's what they told her. She arrived in a plain beige dress, no designer tags, no entourage. The staff sneered. The manager called security. Guests stared. But what they didn't know was that the woman they'd just humiliated was Sienna Hart, the founder of the very charity they were celebrating. And in just 2 hours, her billionaire husband's 320-foot yacht would pull into the marina, delivering not just poetic justice, but a masterclass in humility. This is the story of what happens when the world judges you by what you wear, and finds out too late that you built the room they thought you didn't belong in. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. "Excuse me, ma'am, do you work here?" The words hit like a slap in the face, though they were spoken with the soft politeness of customer service. Sienna Hart blinked once and looked up from her phone, catching the half-smile on the receptionist's lips. Not quite a grin, not quite sincere. More like someone smiling while deciding whether or not to call security. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and straightened her posture, letting her eyes drift upward to the sparkling chandelier that hung over the marble lobby of the Grand Bellezza Resort. Around her, guests lounged in designer labels and vacationed in effortless elegance. Meanwhile, Sienna wore a sand-colored dress that had no logo and no flash, only quiet refinement. No one else saw it that way. "I'm here for the Hart Foundation Gala," Sienna replied evenly, her tone soft but unwavering. "My name is Sienna Hart. I'm not staff, I'm a guest. Actually, I'm the founder." The receptionist's brows pulled together as her fingers moved uncertainly across the keyboard. She hadn't even asked for ID yet. Just a once-over glance was enough for her to start doubting. Sienna could see it unfold behind her neutral expression. The way her eyes flickered down to the shoes, then to the lack of makeup, then back up with just a little less hospitality than before. "Sorry, I don't see you listed here," the receptionist said, dragging out the words. "Are you sure you're not with the catering company?" Sienna smiled again. Polite, controlled. "I came directly from a site check for the auction items. My assistant should have confirmed our arrival. My husband Luca is docking shortly. He'll be joining me by the marina." That's when a second figure entered the lobby. The click of polished dress shoes echoed sharply as a tall man in a gray suit approached the desk with a smile that looked as if it had been ironed into his face and held there by habit, not kindness. "Is there a problem?" he asked, though the answer was already in his eyes. Cameron Boyd, general manager of Grand Bellezza Resort. His nameplate gleamed gold, just like everything else around here. He had the sharp posture of a man used to orchestrating beauty and control, of curating luxury and discarding whatever didn't fit the image. The receptionist leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Sienna saw his expression shift by millimeters. That was all it took. A tiny breath out through his nose, a shallow scan of her from head to toe. Boyd stepped forward and offered the kind of practiced smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Mrs. Hart, was it? This is a private establishment. The Hart Foundation Gala is an exclusive event. Perhaps there's been some confusion." Sienna tilted her head, voice still calm. "There's no confusion. I'm Sienna Hart. My team's been working with your staff for 3 months on tonight's event. My husband, Luca Hart." Boyd chuckled lightly and raised a hand to stop her. "Mrs. Hart is a well-known philanthropist. She wouldn't be arriving, unaccompanied, and certainly not dressed like this." His tone was dipped in disdain, hidden behind civility. The implication was clear. Sienna reached into her purse. "I can show you ID if that helps," but Boyd raised his hand again, now less polite. "Anyone can print an ID these days. We've had issues with impersonators before. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. Security will escort you." Just like that. No raised voice, no argument, just a slow wave of the hand, and 2 security guards in tailored navy uniforms stepped from the corner where they'd been watching. The receptionist lowered her eyes, pretending to check her screen again. The guests nearby weren't pretending at all. They were watching, some whispering behind manicured hands, others recording the moment discreetly with phones tilted just right. It wasn't every day a woman claiming to be the billionaire's wife got kicked out of a 5-star resort. Sienna took a slow breath. "I understand," she said. "May I use the restroom before I leave?" Boyd hesitated, then gave a clipped nod. "Make it quick." As she walked away, she heard him mutter to the guards, "Make sure she actually leaves. These types will try anything." These types. Sienna said nothing. Inside the women's restroom, a cavern of marble and crystal and faint eucalyptus scent, she entered a stall and locked it behind her. The silence wrapped around her like armor. She pulled out her phone and typed one line of text. Code Hazel. Grand Bellezza. 2 hours. The reply came instantly. Confirmed. Protocol in motion. Sienna's lips curled into a barely there smile. Outside, the guards were waiting when she returned. The taller one raised an eyebrow. "Ready, miss? Whatever your name actually is." "Of course," Sienna said. They flanked her without touching her, leading her through the elegant lobby like a criminal in a ball gown. Guests turned to stare. Someone gasped audibly when Boyd stepped out from behind the desk again, just to witness her being removed. He clasped his hands behind his back like a monarch in court. "Perhaps next time you'll make a reservation under your own name," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We only host the Hart Foundation events out of respect for Mr. Hart. His wife is known for her exquisite taste, something clearly not everyone shares." There were chuckles from some guests. Others simply looked down, uncomfortable. Sienna didn't break stride. She didn't flinch. She only turned her head slightly and said, "I'll be sure to pass along your hospitality to my husband." Boyd chuckled. "Yes, I'm sure he'll be very impressed, if he exists." When they reached the front entrance, one of the guards tilted his head toward the taxi line. "Need us to call a cab?" he asked, his tone condescending. "No, thank you," Sienna said with grace. "I'll manage." As she walked down the curved driveway, the thick double doors of the Grand Bellezza closed behind her with a muffled finality. A hush seemed to fall over the scene. She didn't look back. She strolled along the sunlit promenade beside the resort's private shoreline, passing boutique shops, art vendors, and joggers unaware that they had just passed one of the most influential women on the West Coast. Sienna reached a small cafe nestled into the cliffside, its terrace overlooking the sea. She selected a table with a perfect view of the harbor and ordered an iced tea. She took a slow sip, then checked her watch. 1 hour and 40 minutes until Luca arrived. Her phone vibrated again. Luca furious. ETA, 100 minutes. Transport drop in 20. She smiled softly. The storm would arrive on schedule. And when it did, it wouldn't be with shouting or threats. No tantrums. No lawsuits. No, this lesson would come like a whisper in a ballroom, like a ripple across calm water, and it would be unforgettable. The guards may have worn designer suits, but their presence felt no different than bouncers at a nightclub, an unspoken warning to anyone who dared defy the expectations of a place like the Grand Bellezza. One walked slightly behind her, the other to her side, giving Sienna just enough personal space to suggest she wasn't in danger, only that she didn't belong. As they reached the curb outside the resort, a passing guest stopped mid-sentence, their voice trailing off as they recognized the woman who had just been publicly ejected. Some watched her with curiosity, others with that subtle, smug superiority reserved for people who assume they've witnessed justice. But no one offered help. No one spoke in her defense, except for one woman. She stood beneath the shade of a white umbrella, dressed in a crisp linen blazer and oversized sunglasses, her phone subtly raised in one hand. She didn't approach, didn't interfere, just recorded. Just like that, a digital witness was born. Sienna noticed her, made eye contact briefly, and gave the faintest nod. Then, without another word, she turned left and began walking down the coastal promenade, her silhouette small against the towering architecture of the resort behind her. The guards didn't follow. Boyd had gotten his wish. She was out. And yet, even as her simple beige dress fluttered in the ocean breeze and the last whispers of mockery faded behind her, Sienna's heart rate remained steady. Her hands didn't tremble. There was no anger etched in her brow, no fire of humiliation burning in her cheeks. She had faced far worse, much worse. Back before she ever knew yachts or foundations or silver-plated cutlery, she'd known rejection. Poverty. People telling her to come back when you can afford it. And yet, she always did. The cafe she stopped at was quiet, tucked into a gentle curve of the coastline, with hanging vines and small vases of fresh peonies on each table. The waiter didn't seem to recognize her, or if he did, he didn't let it show. "Just an iced tea, please," she said softly. As the waiter walked away, she turned her gaze toward the marina, where small fishing boats bobbed lazily against the docks. A heron glided low over the water. The sea was so calm it barely made a sound. Then her phone buzzed again. "Diane, package arriving in 17. He is livid. ETA now 95 mins." She allowed herself a slow exhale through her nose, then texted back a single line. "Let the package approach. Initiate warm handoff." 17 minutes later, a matte black SUV with tinted windows pulled up beside the cafe. The driver stepped out. A woman in a crisp navy blue uniform, hair pinned back, tablet tucked under one arm. She scanned the outdoor seating area once before locking eyes with Sienna. "Mrs. Hart?" she asked. "Yes. Thank you for coming, Lana," Sienna said, standing with grace. The driver placed a long garment bag and matching suitcase beside the chair. "Your assistant said it was urgent. Is everything all right?" "Just a small misunderstanding," Sienna replied. "Nothing that can't be corrected with good timing." "Understood. Would you like me to wait?" "No, but tell Luca I'm safe. Let him know I'm handling the opening." Lana nodded, giving a faint, knowing smile. "He's preparing for something dramatic. You know how he is." "I know," Sienna smiled back, "but I'd rather end this with wisdom than wrath." The woman left as quietly as she came. Sienna reached for the garment bag, gathered her things, and headed toward the cafe's powder room. 15 minutes later, a completely transformed woman walked out. Gone was the beige dress and sandals. In their place, a cream-colored silk ensemble with structured shoulders and a flowing hemline that moved like liquid. Her hair, once tied back in a simple bun, now tumbled over her shoulders in soft waves. Diamond studs twinkled against her ears. Around her neck was a necklace made of delicate platinum links, each holding a single diamond teardrop, Luca's first anniversary gift. She paid her bill with cash, leaving a $100 tip for the server who hadn't judged her. Then she turned toward the promenade again, heels clicking against stone, posture poised, elegance in every step. As she walked, people's reactions shifted. The same cafe patrons who had ignored her earlier now turned their heads. Some offered polite nods. Others simply stared, unsure if this was the same woman or someone entirely new. It didn't matter. They weren't the ones she was walking toward. She checked her watch again. Just under an hour. Time for the next move. She dialed a number from memory. When the call picked up, the voice on the other end was warm and curious. "Grace, darling? Or do I say Sienna now? It's been a while." "Hello, Carter. I need a small favor." Carter Lingston, the elusive billionaire who owned the Grand Bellezza Resort, was a longtime friend of Luca's, and one of the few who had earned Sienna's respect. She recounted the events from earlier, careful to remain calm and light-hearted. "No accusations, no demands." "You want me to fire Boyd?" Carter asked, his tone already irritated. "No," she replied. "I want to educate him." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "You and Luca, always with the poetic justice." Back at the Grand Bellezza, Cameron Boyd was basking in the aftermath of his supposed victory. He'd handled a potential disruptor with efficiency, maintained the resort's image, and ensured a smooth gala evening ahead. That is, until the front desk buzzed his intercom. "Sir, call on line 1. It's Mr. Lingston." Boyd stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the centerpiece he'd just adjusted. Carter Lingston rarely called. The last time he had, it had been to personally congratulate Boyd on landing the Hart Foundation gala. He picked up the phone with his best composed voice. "Mr. Lingston, a pleasure." "Boyd," Carter interrupted, voice flat. "Luca Hart's yacht is docking at our marina, within the hour." "Yes, of course, we're fully prepared for. He's not happy. There was a situation involving his wife?" Boyd went cold. He fumbled for words. "There was a woman who claimed to be Mrs. Hart. But sir, she didn't look. There were no credentials, her appearance." "Have you ever actually met Sienna Hart in person?" Carter asked. Boyd faltered. "No, but she's notoriously private. No social media. Avoids press like the plague. The photos you've seen are 10 years old and blurry for a reason." Boyd's hand shook on the desk. Carter's voice dropped. "The Aurelia is bigger than this resort. Luca can buy us, gut us, and sell the name to a golf course if he wants to. So I'd fix this. Fast." Boyd barely got the words, "Yes, sir," out before the call ended. He stumbled toward his office computer and searched again for photos. This time he looked with real eyes. And when he compared the facial structure, the slight dimple, the distinct jawline, with the woman he'd thrown out, his stomach turned. "Oh God," he whispered. He buzzed the lobby. "Get me everything on the Aurelia, now." The front desk clerk nearly dropped her headset as she scrambled to print the yacht's incoming manifest. The name The Aurelia was stamped in bold across the screen. 320 feet of luxury, custom designed for Luca Hart. A floating palace, now less than an hour from their private marina. As Cameron Boyd scanned the document, panic settled fully in his chest. It was real. Every inch of it. Verified. Approaching. He muttered a curse under his breath. "I need the red carpet unrolled at the dock now," he barked into the staff radio. "Champagne, staff in full formal, move." His staff jumped into action, confused but obedient. Boyd stormed through the lobby, suit jacket flapping, muttering orders like a general at war. "Fresh flowers. Inform Marina Control they have docking priority. No excuses." He paused only once to stare at the grand mirror behind the concierge desk. For a man who'd built his career on perfection and prestige, the face staring back at him was suddenly ghostly pale. Meanwhile, Sienna walked slowly back toward the resort, her polished heels striking the promenade with rhythmic certainty. Her diamond necklace caught the afternoon sun, refracting points of light with each step. She moved like a woman who knew she belonged, not because of what she wore, but because of who she was. Her phone buzzed again. "Luca. Almost there. You okay?" Sienna smiled at the message and typed back with her usual calm. "Never better. He still doesn't know what's coming. Luke, good. The Aurelia is ready for a grand entrance. Love you. Love you more." She slipped the phone into her clutch and turned the final corner that led back to the resort's boardwalk. The timing was perfect. At the marina, the scene was electric. The Aurelia, with its pristine white hull and towering decks, slid into view like a ghost ship emerging from mist. Guests began gathering at the docks, some resort patrons, others curious locals, all drawn by the magnetic force of wealth on display. Its massive silhouette dwarfed every other vessel in the harbor. People whispered its value in hushed awe. 150 million, 11 cabins, a private helipad. The Grand Bellezza staff scrambled to align silver platters, fill champagne flutes, and perfect floral arrangements. Every step had to be flawless, because Luca Hart wasn't just a billionaire. He was the billionaire. The man whose real estate portfolio stretched across 3 continents. The man who had never made a public scene, but who didn't have to, in order to destroy you. Cameron Boyd stood at the edge of the red carpet, fidgeting with his tie. Sweat lined the collar of his shirt. He kept glancing over his shoulder toward the path from the resort, hoping, praying that he might catch a glimpse of the woman he'd dismissed. Maybe he could apologize. Maybe he could fix it. Maybe. Luca Hart appeared at the top of the gangway. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply stood, surveying the dock like a man stepping into enemy territory. His tall frame cut a sharp figure in a tailored navy suit, his silver blonde hair slicked back, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He began descending, each step deliberate. Behind him, crew members in white lined the deck, like a royal court awaiting instruction. Boyd took a deep breath, stepped forward and forced a smile. "Mr. Hart," he said, voice cracking slightly. "Welcome to Grand Bellezza. I'm Cameron Boyd, the general manager. It's..." Luca walked right past him without so much as a glance. Boyd flinched. "Mr. Hart," he called, more desperate now, trying to catch up. "About earlier, there was a misunderstanding, a mix-up involving your wife." Luca stopped. The air went still. He turned slowly to face Boyd, removing his sunglasses. His eyes, cool, calculating, cut right through him. "A misunderstanding?" Luca repeated, voice low but deadly calm. "Is that what you're calling it?" Boyd swallowed hard. The whispers among the crowd behind them grew louder. Many had seen what happened earlier, now realizing who the woman had been. "She arrived alone," Boyd stammered. "She wasn't on the list, and she didn't look." "She didn't look rich enough, is that it?" Luca asked. "No, that's not what I meant," Boyd sputtered. "It's just that she wasn't dressed like someone you respect." Luca didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The tension was already suffocating. Then, as if on cue, a new figure appeared at the top of the yacht's gangway. Gasps rose from the crowd. Sienna Hart stepped forward, now radiant under the afternoon sun. Her cream gown flowed with each step, her hair glowing in soft curls. The diamond necklace at her collarbone shimmered like starlight. But it wasn't the jewelry or the dress that held the crowd in place. It was her poise. It was the way she descended the gangway like it belonged to her. Because it did. The crowd parted as she reached the red carpet. People who had seen her thrown out hours earlier now stood in stunned silence. Some lowered their eyes, others whispered apologies they didn't dare speak aloud. She stepped beside Luca and took his hand. Together, they turned to face Boyd, who looked as though he might collapse. "Mrs. Hart," he croaked. I didn't recognize you. I'm so deeply sorry." Sienna raised a hand, silencing him with grace alone. "Mr. Boyd," she said clearly, her voice echoing across the dock, "I believe we have a gala to prepare. Shall we continue our discussion inside?" That was all. No scolding, no grand monologue, just one sentence, delivered with more power than any tantrum or lawsuit ever could. Then she turned, and the crowd, as if by instinct, stepped aside to clear her path back into the resort. Boyd followed, trailing behind them like a man being led to his reckoning. Inside the Grand Belleza's private lounge, away from the murmurs and camera phones, Boyd stood across from the couple, stripped of all the authority he once wielded. "I want to apologize," he said, barely able to hold eye contact. "There's no excuse for the way I treated your wife. I take full responsibility." Sienna studied him. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I grew up in Idaho. My father was a mechanic. My mother worked double shifts in a diner. I paid for college selling handmade candles and tutoring on weekends." Boyd blinked, unsure what to say. "I built the Hart Foundation before I met Luca, with $5,000 and a dream. It now funds over 20 programs across the country, programs for kids who look like I did at 18. Kids who get ignored because they wear thrift store jeans or speak quietly." She leaned forward slightly. "I don't want your job, Mr. Boyd. That would be too easy." He stiffened. "I want your time." Luca smiled knowingly. "Our foundation runs a mentorship program for underprivileged youth. You're going to volunteer 1 year, no excuses. You'll teach them about your industry, and maybe, in the process, learn what true professionalism really means." Boyd nodded, jaw tight, heart pounding. "Of course, Mrs. Hart. I'll begin immediately. And one more thing," she added gently. "Tonight's gala will now include a new initiative, a hospitality scholarship fund, fully funded by the Grand Belleza." Boyd hesitated for half a second, then nodded again. "Yes, Mrs. Hart." As Boyd left the room, Sienna sat beside Luca and exhaled. "Well," Luca said with a smirk, "that was poetic." "Let's just hope he learns," Sienna replied softly. "Enough people who judge others by how they look miss the most valuable parts of them." "And those who don't?" Luca asked. "They change the world." Cameron Boyd shut the lounge door behind him, the quiet click echoing like a gavel through a courtroom. He stood still for a moment, staring at his reflection in the mirrored panel opposite him. Gone was the confident general manager with the perfectly curated smile. What stared back at him now was a man unraveling, his composure cracked, his pride fractured. He tugged at his collar. It was too tight. His mouth was dry. He could still hear Sienna Hart's calm voice ringing in his ears. "I want your time." He moved through the corridor in a daze, heading back toward the lobby. Staff nodded nervously as he passed, uncertain whether to meet his eyes or look away. He didn't blame them. His reputation had been built over years, one polished event at a time, and in the span of a single afternoon it had been reduced to ashes, not by shouting or scandal, but by elegance, humility, and that woman's unshakable grace. He had thrown out Sienna Hart, and now he would be the one staying late cleaning up the damage. Meanwhile, word of what had happened began to ripple through the resort like wildfire. "Did you hear?" whispered a guest by the pool. "She was the one they kicked out earlier," said another, brows raised. "That was Mrs. Hart?" a woman gasped. "I thought she was some tourist." Within minutes, the story had reached nearly every corner of the Grand Bellezza. Staff exchanged wide-eyed glances. Guests whispered in hallways. Even kitchen chefs paused mid-prep to ask for details. But Sienna didn't care for the attention. That had never been the point. She was already deep in preparation for the gala, now just a few hours away, seated in the Grand Bellezza's West Wing parlor with Diane, her assistant, finalizing last-minute additions to the event. "The mentorship sign-up booth is ready," Diane reported, "and we've added a spotlight moment in the program for you to announce the scholarship fund." Sienna looked up from her notes. Make sure it's positioned right after the live auction. Done. Diane nodded. Also, Mr. Boyd's assistant emailed. He's already begun drafting the foundation partnership proposal. Sienna paused. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, then faded into quiet satisfaction. Good, she said. Let's give him the chance to become more than what he was. Down by the marina, the Aurelia still sat like a dream, its presence commanding, elegant, and utterly irrefutable. Children pointed at it from the harbor, their parents pulling out phones to snap photos. Locals whispered stories of its custom Italian chandeliers, its onboard spa, its private piano bar. No one needed to be told who owned it. The name Hart had become synonymous with power and discretion. It wasn't the flashiest empire in America, but it was among the most respected. Luca Hart had earned his fortune the hard way, from flipping foreclosed homes in his 20s to spearheading billion-dollar urban renewal projects in cities that had once been forgotten. And yet, he would have burned it all down for Sienna if she had asked. That was what Cameron Boyd hadn't understood. That was the mistake. Back inside the resort, Sienna walked into the grand ballroom to inspect the final details. The golden uplighting shimmered across the vaulted ceilings. Round tables were arranged in concentric circles, each adorned with rare orchids, custom name cards, and delicate gold flatware. It was beautiful, elegant, everything it needed to be. Yet she found herself focusing on something else. The people beginning to arrive. Young women in off-the-rack dresses who looked nervous near the crystal displays. Middle-aged donors in outdated suits who smiled humbly as they were handed programs. Volunteers from her foundation who stood tall despite not wearing brand names or designer heels. They were her people. The underestimated. The invisible. The very ones she had once been. Cameron Boyd re-entered the ballroom just as the string quartet began tuning their instruments. His gaze swept across the crowd. Everything was in motion. Every flower petal perfectly placed. Every hors d'oeuvre tray gleaming. But for the first time in his career, he didn't care about the aesthetic. He spotted Sienna across the room, standing beside Luca, speaking to a small group of scholarship recipients. She laughed at something one of them said, her head tilted, eyes shining. Then she noticed Cameron. She gave a small nod. He walked toward her, every step feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. When he reached them, he bowed his head slightly. I've drafted the mentorship commitment, he said quietly, and I've asked HR to create a recurring training seminar on guest dignity and implicit bias. I'd like to make that a permanent part of onboarding. Luca raised an eyebrow. Sienna simply asked, Was that your idea? Boyd nodded. It was, inspired by this afternoon. I think I saw something I'd spent my entire career missing. Sienna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward a group of young women arriving through the side doors, dressed modestly, holding hands, their eyes wide with awe at the chandeliers above them. One of them wore the exact same beige dress Sienna had worn earlier. She turned back to Boyd. Then maybe today wasn't a disaster, she said. Maybe it was just the beginning. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the MC took the stage, Sienna stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching the crowd. The guests had come expecting glamour. What they were about to receive was a glimpse into something far greater: impact. The MC tapped the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's auction, the founder of the Hart Foundation would like to say a few words. The applause was polite. Then Sienna walked out, and the entire room stood. Not for the dress, not for the jewelry, for her. For the woman who had once been dismissed on these very floors and now held the room without even raising her voice. Some of you saw me earlier today, she began. You saw me in a beige dress, arriving alone, without announcement or flair, and you assumed I didn't belong. There were no gasps, just silence. Respectful, solemn. But the truth is, I've spent most of my life looking like someone who didn't belong. In boardrooms, in universities, in country clubs, in every place where appearances mattered more than purpose. She paused, scanning the audience. And today, that assumption was challenged. So tonight, in honor of the lessons we've all learned, the Hart Foundation is launching a new initiative, a hospitality scholarship fund for students from underprivileged communities. And it will be fully funded, starting with tonight's gala. The room erupted in applause. Sienna smiled. We can't control how others see us, she continued, but we can choose how we respond. And sometimes the best response is simply showing up in truth and letting the world catch up. She stepped back from the microphone, and the crowd rose again, not out of politeness, but out of deep, genuine admiration. Behind the curtain, Luca was waiting. You were perfect, he whispered as she approached. Sienna leaned into him. No, just honest. He kissed her forehead gently, which is always more powerful than perfect. The ballroom glowed beneath its golden chandeliers, but the brightest light came not from above, but from the clarity in the room. Sienna Hart's speech had shifted something. It was subtle, yes, but palpable, like a breeze sweeping away a heavy fog. The crowd, wealthy donors, city officials, entrepreneurs, stood, applauding not out of obligation, but in quiet awe of the woman who had, just hours earlier, been treated like a trespasser. Some wiped at their eyes, others murmured words to their tablemates that no one had dared to say aloud until now. She was the one they kicked out. That woman, that was Mrs. Hart. I didn't recognize her. I thought. They didn't finish their sentences. There was no need. Their guilt was painted across their faces. Sienna didn't need to twist the knife. She never did. Her calm exposure of their prejudice was already more cutting than any humiliation they could have imagined. In the far back of the room, Cameron Boyd stood near the service doors, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. He couldn't applaud. Not yet. Not sincerely. The clapping all around him felt like it passed through him, not with him. He felt exposed in a different way. He remembered every detail from earlier that day. Her calm voice at the front desk, the quiet dignity she maintained as he waved off her ID, the way she never begged, never raised her voice. She just let him speak. And now, she was the one speaking back, without ever mentioning his name. It was crushing, but it was fair. He had been given a second chance, not because he earned it, but because she believed in the power of transformation. What am I going to do with that? He thought. What kind of man am I, after today? Backstage, Sienna sipped water and took a long, quiet breath. Diane stood beside her, smiling proudly. You didn't just walk back into that room, you owned it. I didn't want to own it, Sienna replied. I just wanted them to see it differently. They saw you, Diane said gently. Truly. Luca joined them then, slipping his arm around Sienna's waist. Your speech made even the cynics at table 7 cry, he whispered. Sienna leaned into him. It wasn't for them. It was for the girl who came in through the service door in thrift store shoes and still dared to dream. Luca kissed the side of her head. That girl never left. Outside, the marina shimmered in moonlight. The Aurelia remained docked, its silhouette reflected in the quiet harbor like a sleeping monument. Staff and crew had taken their positions again for the after-party, but the energy had changed. Conversations were hushed, reverent. Even the servers who earlier may have judged her now exchanged glances of wonder. Sienna Hart had gone from dismissed to unforgettable. Meanwhile, Cameron Boyd sat alone in his office, the noise of the gala faint through the walls. In front of him were two things: a draft of the new mentorship program proposal and a personal note he'd written, still unsigned. He reread it again. Dear Mrs. Hart, what I saw today wasn't just a woman in a cream dress who redefined a room. I saw the woman I failed to see in a beige one. I judged you, and worse, I acted on that judgment. There are no excuses, only lessons. You extended grace when I deserved none. Thank you. I hope to earn your respect, not by words, but by how I show up for the students you've entrusted me to mentor. I was wrong. I want to do better. Cameron Boyd. He tapped the paper once, then slid it into an envelope. There was a knock. He looked up. One of the junior managers peeked inside. Mr. Boyd? She said, hesitating. Mrs. Hart's assistant asked if you'd be available to speak with the first cohort of scholarship recipients next week. About hospitality careers. He stood, nodding immediately. Yes, I'd be honored. Later that night, the after-party on the marina glowed under soft lanterns strung from yacht to yacht. Sienna walked barefoot along the dock now, her heels dangling from one hand, the cool planks creaking beneath her steps. The crowd had thinned. Most of the donors were enjoying dessert inside. She wanted air. She approached the edge of the dock where the Aurelia swayed gently. From here, she could see the faint lights of the city across the bay. Beyond that, neighborhoods she had once called home. Fast food drive-thrus, library parking lots. Late-night shifts where she counted coins in tip jars. So many people wanted the world to know their wealth. She had once just wanted to be heard. Now, she had both, but she never let them define her. Not the gowns, not the yacht, not even the gala. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, I was enough before all this. Behind her, Luca's footsteps approached. He slid an arm around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. You okay? He asked softly. I am, she replied. What are you thinking about? She looked up at the moon. About the girl who got kicked out of the resort today. He chuckled. She'll be fine. She already is, Sienna whispered, but I hope the world never forgets how fast they judged her. Luca turned her toward him. They won't, because you didn't disappear. You came back, on your own terms. She nodded. Then with a half-smile she added, and you brought a yacht. Would have brought a parade if you asked. Sienna laughed, a soft, private sound. No. This was better. Just then Diane's text lit up her phone. Donation total just passed $8.4 million and counting. Sienna's smile widened. 8.4, she murmured. For the girl in the beige dress, Luca said. No, she corrected him. For all the ones still wearing theirs. I told you she didn't belong here. The voice belonged to a guest still lingering by the poolside bar, a smug chuckle buried in the ice of his martini. He hadn't been inside for the gala. He hadn't heard the speech. All he had seen hours earlier was a woman in a plain dress being escorted out, and he had taken that as confirmation of the world as he understood it. But now, as the string quartet's music drifted through the marble columns, and Sienna Hart re-emerged onto the ballroom terrace, hand in hand with her husband Luca, the air itself seemed to hush. Because behind them, docked and gleaming beneath the moonlight, was the Aurelia, Luca Hart's legendary yacht. And the simple woman that so many had mocked was now the most sought-after figure on the coast. Earlier, back inside the ballroom, something had happened after Sienna's speech. Something that couldn't be measured in applause. It was the subtle rearranging of social gravity. The same people who had dismissed her on sight were now trying to catch her attention. Donors approached more gently. City officials adjusted their tone. Even the luxury brand executives, who once insisted she let their stylists dress her for events, now complimented her choice to arrive so authentically. But Sienna didn't smile to please them. She had only one purpose that night: to lead, to give, and to shift the lens through which people viewed worth. Down by the resort's private marina, staff had redoubled their efforts to prepare for what would become the most unforgettable after-party in Grand Bellezza history. Candlelit lanterns floated in glass bowls across the water. Soft jazz wafted through hidden speakers. The pier had been turned into a dreamscape, every detail matching the precision and grace of Sienna herself. And then, the moment arrived. Guests who hadn't yet witnessed the yacht's entrance gathered at the edge of the marina just in time to see its spotlight sweep the harbor. Gasps rang out as the Aurelia, with her 320-foot-long silhouette, began her slow, majestic approach. Her hull glowed pearl white under strategically placed LED strips, her decks bustling with motion as staff readied her for docking. She's enormous, someone whispered. She's not just a yacht, another said. She's a statement. She's a revelation, murmured a third, a woman who had been sitting in judgment just hours before. She clutched her glass of champagne and blinked slowly, trying to grasp the scale of the shift she was witnessing. Luca stood at the bow in a sharp tuxedo, nodding respectfully to the dockhands. But it wasn't his presence alone that sent ripples through the resort crowd. It was the knowledge of what had transpired earlier and what Sienna had not said. There had been no public shaming of Boyd, no name-calling, no outburst. She had simply arrived, shown who she was, and let the truth do its work. Now she was about to complete the full circle. Cameron Boyd stood with his hands clasped in front of him, just a few feet behind the velvet ropes that separated the private dock from the guests. His jaw was clenched. He had prepared his apology, rehearsed it, revised it, and now he prayed for the opportunity to deliver it. But what he didn't know was that he'd already been judged, not by his actions earlier, but by what he'd done after. Sienna had watched. When he sent the scholarship draft, when he quietly corrected his staff, when he, for the first time in years, said, "I was wrong," and meant it. As the gangway from the Aurelia extended, a hush fell over the gathering. Then she appeared. Sienna Hart, standing at the top, illuminated in the golden glow of the yacht's accent lights, her cream gown fluttering in the wind like sails at full mast. Her earrings shimmered, her posture was relaxed. She looked serene, unbothered, untouchable. Luca extended his hand, and together they descended. The crowd stepped back to create a path. This time, not because they were ordered to, but because it felt right. They watched in reverent silence as the couple made their way toward the gala's final gathering on the pier, where a massive check had just been placed, a symbol of the $8.4 million raised that evening. But it wasn't the number that stunned people. It was the story behind it, a woman discarded as ordinary, rising as the very embodiment of power and grace. Near the champagne table, a hotel board member turned to Cameron Boyd, whispering under his breath, "You should have recognized her." Boyd nodded. "I did," he replied quietly, "just too late." As Sienna and Luca arrived at the edge of the dock where a brief closing ceremony was planned, she turned toward the staff assembled behind the scenes. To the waiters, to the valet, to the young woman at the front desk who had faltered but never mocked her. She nodded gently at each one, eyes filled not with pity, but encouragement, because she remembered what it felt like to stand there unnoticed. The event's host stepped forward with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we conclude tonight's celebration with the introduction of the Hart Hospitality Initiative, a full-year mentorship and scholarship commitment launching tonight with the Grand Belleza's first-year sponsorship." Applause rang out again. Sienna stepped forward and accepted the microphone. "For every young man or woman who's ever been told they didn't belong," she said softly, "this is for you. Your worth doesn't depend on your outfit, or your bank account, or whether someone else recognizes it." She paused, then turned to Boyd, only briefly but long enough to deliver her final lesson. Sometimes, the most valuable diamonds arrive unpolished, and the people who shine the brightest are the ones willing to be underestimated. The crowd rose once again, not in ceremony, but in respect. That night, as the lights dimmed and the last guests drifted back into the resort, the Aurelia remained docked, casting her reflection across the water like a monument to quiet strength. And in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the transformation of perception, a new understanding was born. Sienna Hart wasn't powerful because she was rich. She was powerful because she never needed to prove she was. The moment the final applause died down and the Hart Foundation's yacht glittered behind the resort like a dream made real, Grand Belleza's staff began to move with quiet urgency, but none more frantically than Cameron Boyd. He paced the edge of the marina with his earpiece still buzzing, barking commands that no longer carried their usual confident cadence. "Sarah, confirm that all security footage of earlier has been flagged. No leaks," he snapped. "Yes, sir," came the nervous reply. He wasn't worried about damage control. No, what kept his stomach churning was something much deeper. Guilt. And the knowledge that he'd stood at the center of one of the most disgraceful miscalculations in the resort's history. Then came the phone call he didn't want, but knew was coming. Carter Lingston, owner of the Grand Belleza and longtime friend of Luca Hart, had watched the entire event unfold via live stream. "Cameron," Carter said coolly, "you made national headlines tonight." Boyd swallowed hard. "Sir, I take full responsibility. I've already begun drafting a formal apology to Mr. and Mrs. Hart, and we've started internal bias training." "You're missing the point," Carter interrupted. "You humiliated a woman who built what this gala represents. That wasn't just a guest, that was the soul of this evening." Boyd's voice cracked. "I know. Cameron, listen to me very carefully. If Mrs. Hart leaves this weekend without a reason to believe you learned something real, you're done." Silence. "Find that woman," Carter said, "and show her you're not just another man who sees power only when it's wearing diamonds." Click. Boyd stared at his phone for a long time. Then he turned toward the resort's lower lounge, where Sienna had briefly retreated with a small group of Foundation Scholarship winners. She wasn't the woman he had met at check-in. No, that woman had been a threat to his assumptions. Now she was the woman who had redefined everything. He moved quickly down the hallway, passing servers and guests. Some gave him sideways glances, curious, judgmental, even a little gleeful. They had all seen it. His downfall, dressed in soft fabric and wielding nothing but poise. He reached the private door and knocked once. Diane answered. "She's not seeing guests at the moment," Diane said, her expression unreadable. "I understand," Boyd said, lowering his voice. "But I'm not here as the general manager. I'm here as a man who got it terribly wrong." Inside, Sienna sat across from two young girls, both first-year college students, both new scholarship recipients. They looked at her like one might look at a lighthouse, something that cut through uncertainty with quiet certainty. Sienna smiled at one of them. "You don't need to prove yourself to people who don't understand your worth. Just keep walking. The ones who need to see you will." The girl nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Then Diane leaned down and whispered softly in Sienna's ear. Sienna nodded once, then stood and stepped outside. Boyd rose as she entered the hallway, his hands at his sides, no script, no clipboard. Just a folded letter in his coat pocket and a heart so loud he could barely hear anything else. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he began, "because I don't deserve it yet." Sienna waited, let him sit in the silence. "I didn't see you," he continued. "I mean, I saw you, but I didn't see you. I judged what you wore, how you arrived. I assumed, and then I acted on that assumption." Sienna's face revealed nothing. Boyd cleared his throat. "You didn't shame me tonight. You could have, and no one would have blamed you, but instead, you educated me." He reached into his pocket and handed her the envelope. "I wrote this before the gala ended. It's my formal resignation. Unless you believe I can still be useful in the mentorship program, I'll do it either way. But I leave the choice to you." Sienna took the envelope but didn't open it. She studied him with the same quiet scrutiny he had once given her, though hers wasn't to diminish. It was to understand. Finally, she spoke. "What would you say," she asked, "to the next woman who walks in here wearing thrift store shoes and no makeup?" "I'd say, welcome, and then I'd ask how I can help." Sienna's gaze softened just a little. "Then maybe," she said, "you've already started." She handed the envelope back unopened. Later that night, as guests began filing out into the warm coastal air and chauffeurs lined the driveway under glowing lanterns, Sienna stepped onto the terrace beside Luca. The resort, now transformed, felt different. Like the entire building had taken a deep breath and let go of something heavy. "You handled him kindly," Luca said, slipping his arm around her waist. "He was ashamed," Sienna replied. "But sometimes shame is the beginning of growth," he nodded. "So what now?" "We wait," she said. "We watch. If he's serious, he'll show it. In the classrooms, with the kids. That's where change starts." Luca looked out toward the Aurelia, where some of the guests were now taking twilight tours aboard her lower decks. "You know," he mused, "you didn't need the yacht." "I know," Sienna said, smiling. "But it helped." They both laughed, then grew quiet again, watching the sea roll under the moonlight. Back in the lobby, the same receptionist who had first questioned Sienna now stood alone at her desk. She stared at the guest book, guilt rising in her chest. She hadn't mocked Sienna, no, but she hadn't defended her either. She'd let the current carry her. Then, just before closing the night log, she turned her page and scribbled something in the margin. "I will see people, not clothes," and she underlined it twice. By midnight, the Grand Bellessa stood still again. The music had faded, the chandeliers dimmed, but something permanent remained. A story, a lesson, an elegant reminder whispered into the very walls of the resort that wealth means nothing without wisdom, that dignity doesn't come from appearance, but from how you rise after being dismissed, and that sometimes the most powerful woman in the room is the one you never saw coming. The ocean murmured softly in the distance, waves lapping the marina dock like applause that refused to die down. The moon hung high, casting silver across the decks of the Aurelia, but the real glow came from the woman who now stood at the center of it all. Sienna Hart, the woman who had been mistaken for a wanderer, who'd been turned away by uniforms and shallow glances. Now, she walked the gleaming ballroom floor as the very pulse of the night, a vision of elegance, dignity, and poetic justice. Guests whispered in awe as she passed, some still stunned by the revelation, others privately ashamed of what they had assumed. No one needed reminding of how this night had begun. They had all seen it, or worse, ignored it. Now she wasn't just the host of the gala. She was the message. Luca Hart watched from the edge of the ballroom, his eyes following Sienna with a kind of quiet pride most men would never earn. Not pride in her beauty, though she possessed it effortlessly. Not pride in her success, though her foundation had just raised over $8 million in a single evening. No, it was pride in who she was when no one was looking, in the way she didn't need to shame those who wronged her, in the way she let them bury themselves in their own reflection. A server passed with a silver tray of champagne. Luca took one, nodded gratefully, then continued watching his wife as she approached a small group of young students at the edge of the ballroom, first-time scholars who wore their thrifted suits and borrowed dresses like armor. And the moment Sienna joined them, they lit up, because they saw themselves in her. And for the first time, the room saw them too. Cameron Boyd stood quietly near the pillars, apart from the celebration, shoulders slightly hunched. He'd expected exile. He'd expected cold stares, maybe even termination by morning. What he didn't expect was what happened next. Sienna turned mid-conversation and looked directly at him. No performance, no audience, just her eyes, meeting his. Then she did something no one expected. She nodded. One small, deliberate nod. Boyd's breath caught. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something rarer, a door still open. He stepped backward into the shadows, humbled beyond measure. Diane approached Sienna moments later with her tablet in hand. "The final tally's in," she whispered. $8.9 million, highest ever for a single event. Sienna let out a quiet breath. And the hospitality scholarships? Fully funded for the next 3 years. Sienna smiled, not a smile of triumph, but of satisfaction. Real impact, that was always the goal. Not revenge. Not spectacle. Change. A short time later, the lights dimmed in the ballroom, signaling the evening's closing remarks. The MC took the stage again, his voice rich and warm. "As we close this unforgettable evening, we'd like to invite Mrs. Hart for a final message." Sienna stepped onto the stage, accepting the mic with grace. The room silenced immediately. "Tonight has been extraordinary," she began. "Not because of the yacht, not because of the gowns or the chandeliers." She paused, scanning the crowd. "But because of what we chose to see." She let the silence settle. "This morning I walked into this resort in a simple dress and sandals, and saw someone who didn't belong." Soft murmurs passed through the crowd. Heads lowered. "But tonight I saw something else. I saw people ready to shift, to look deeper, to choose vision over vanity." She smiled, soft and sincere. "We raised nearly $9 million tonight, but more importantly, we raised our awareness." Applause began to rise. "And if even one child, walking into a hotel lobby with big dreams in a small suitcase, is treated with kindness because of what we learned here, then we've done something bigger than any check can measure." The room erupted, not just in applause, but in something deeper. A kind of collective catharsis, a reckoning, a renewal. Sienna stepped back, gave a grateful nod, and handed off the mic. She didn't need to say more. She had said everything. Outside, under the stars, the terrace buzzed with conversations more meaningful than menus or designer labels. Guests who had once mingled out of habit now lingered because something had changed. And as the Aurelia glittered behind them, no longer just a symbol of wealth, but of patience, of character, of presence, Sienna stood by the balcony rail, finally alone for a moment. Luca joined her, slipping his fingers between hers. "You were the storm and the calm tonight," he murmured. She smiled. "I was just the mirror," she said softly. "They brought the storm, I just let them see it." Luca leaned in, his voice lower now. "Do you know what I love most about you?" She raised an eyebrow. "You didn't need anyone to feel small in order to feel powerful. You didn't need revenge. You just stood still and let the truth rise." Sienna pressed her forehead to his shoulder. "That's the thing about truth," she whispered. "It always floats to the top." Back at the resort's private security booth, one of the guards, one who had escorted her out earlier that day, watched the live stream replay of the event on his phone. There she was, Sienna Hart. The same woman he'd once flanked out the door, now commanding a global audience. He watched her speech, her poise, her composure. He didn't speak. But after a long silence, he quietly reached for the staff code of conduct booklet on the shelf behind him, and he started to read. Meanwhile, the front desk receptionist who had greeted her that morning sat alone in the back office, replaying every moment in her mind. She remembered Sienna's soft voice, her gentle words. She had been respectful, even when disrespected. Now she sat, composing an email she never thought she'd write. "Mrs. Hart, I didn't speak up when I should have. I saw what was happening and I froze. That silence is something I intend to work on. Thank you for your grace. I hope I grow into someone who deserves it." She clicked send, and then she wept, not out of guilt, but out of a deep desire to be better. Back on the terrace, Luca looked down at the marina where the last of the guests were boarding smaller boats for their return to the mainland. "You ready to head back?" he asked. Sienna nodded. "Let's go home." "Want to take the scenic route?" she smirked. "Always." They turned together, descending the curved stairwell that led back toward the Aurelia, the resort behind them now transformed in more ways than its architecture could show, because now its walls remembered. And the world? The world had just witnessed what happened when you tried to humiliate a woman in silence, only to discover she had built the room you were standing in. The following morning, the Grand Bellezza looked no less pristine, but it felt like a different place. Staff walked with just a bit more intention. The whispers were quieter, more thoughtful. Even the air in the marble lobby seemed charged with awareness. Not fear, not tension, awareness that something real had happened here. In a world obsessed with appearances, a lesson had been carved into stone by a woman in a beige dress and a steady voice. No theatrics, no revenge, just undeniable truth. And now came the ripple. Cameron Boyd sat in his office, the curtains drawn back to let in the soft coastal light. In front of him sat the resort's director of human resources, the public relations director, and 2 board members, one of whom still hadn't unclenched his jaw since walking in. "I'll begin," Boyd said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "I've reviewed the full footage of yesterday's events. I've documented each failure of protocol, and I've taken responsibility." He paused, glancing down at the mentorship folder Sienna had handed him. "But I'm not resigning." The HR director lifted an eyebrow. Boyd continued, "Because resignation would be too easy. I was offered something harder, something better." He pushed the folder across the table. "This is my commitment to the Hart Foundation's mentorship program. 1 year, weekly sessions, and not just for me. Every department head, every senior staff member. We will not lecture, we will learn. From the students, from our failures, from her." The board members exchanged glances. The PR director slowly nodded. This could be good. A recovery arc, public acknowledgement without self-destruction. Boyd met her gaze. "This isn't about spin, this is about substance." Downstairs in the Grand Bellezza's main event lounge, the Hart Foundation setup team was already hard at work, packing away banners, auction stands, and floral arrangements. Sienna stood by the back table, sleeves rolled up, personally folding leftover guest cards into boxes. Not because she had to, because she always did. It was the same reason she answered her own emails, still wrote hand-signed thank you notes, and remembered every scholarship recipient by name. Her humility wasn't a brand, it was her. Diane approached, handing her a morning espresso. "The resort just released a statement," she said. "They've acknowledged the incident and pledged full participation in our program." Sienna accepted the cup with a nod. "Did Boyd sign it?" "He wrote it himself." That earned a pause. "Good," Sienna said. "Let's see what he does next." Upstairs, Boyd sent one final message before leaving his office. It wasn't to PR, it wasn't to the media. It was to the mentorship group's inbox, the one created just this morning. "To our future hospitality scholars, my name is Cameron Boyd. Last night I was taught a lesson I should have learned long ago. That wisdom can come from anyone, and that true service begins with humility. I look forward to learning from you and helping you navigate this industry. Not as someone above you, but beside you." He hit send. And for the first time in 20 years of leadership, he felt lighter. Sienna stepped out into the bright morning sun, her hair tied back, wearing a soft linen blouse and white jeans. Casual, unremarkable, and radiant. The valet recognized her instantly this time, not because of her clothes or jewelry, but because the entire resort had seen what real presence looked like. The young man straightened his posture. "Mrs. Hart, your car is ready. May I assist with your bags?" "Thank you, Daniel," she said kindly, remembering his name from the staff list. As he moved toward the trunk, he hesitated, then said, "Ma'am, I was working yesterday. I saw everything, and I just want to say—" She turned to him gently. He looked nervous, young, like someone who didn't quite know if he was allowed to speak. "It meant a lot, watching you handle it the way you did. Sienna smiled, not with pride, but with warmth. "Then that makes two of us," she said softly. "Because watching the people in this resort reflect and grow, that meant a lot to me." He smiled back, eyes brighter. Luca emerged from the lobby, handing her a final travel espresso and giving a small nod toward the retreating valet. "Changing the world one moment at a time?" he teased. "Just doing what I promised," she replied. "Starting with people." He slid into the driver's seat as she settled beside him. As they pulled away, the Grand Bellezza slowly receded behind them. But it wouldn't forget her. Neither would the people in it. Back inside, Cameron Boyd stood by the observation balcony of the upper floor, watching the car disappear beyond the front gates. He didn't feel humiliated. He felt rebuilt. She hadn't fired him. She'd educated him. And now, he would carry that with him into every policy, every interview, every first impression from that day forward. That evening, an internal email was distributed across the Grand Bellezza network. Subject: New staff requirement, the Hart Hospitality Initiative. Body: all employees are required to complete the upcoming mentorship orientation program beginning this quarter. This includes narrative empathy training, role reversal simulations, and live mentoring with student guests from the Hart Foundation. This is not optional. This is the future of our service model. Let us not just offer luxury, let us offer humanity. Signed, Cameron Boyd, General Manager. Across the coast, in a small college dorm, a young woman sat staring at her acceptance letter into the first cohort of the new Hart Scholarship Program. Her hands trembled as she read the email again and again. Then she clicked on the included video link. It was a clip of Sienna Hart's closing speech from the gala. The girl listened to every word, her eyes wide, and when it ended, she whispered aloud, "One day, they'll see me too." The Hart residence wasn't a palace. Not in the traditional sense. No gold gates. No massive fountains, just a tastefully modern home perched above the Pacific, glass walls, clean lines, and a quiet garden that welcomed hummingbirds each morning. Inside, the energy was calm, like the final exhale after a long and meaningful storm. Sienna stood barefoot in the kitchen, her cream cardigan hanging loosely over a fitted tea, hands curled around a ceramic mug. Outside the window, waves rolled in, gentle and endless. Luca walked in behind her, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. "You've been quiet," he said softly. "I've been full," she replied, not turning. "Full of everything that day brought." He leaned beside her on the counter. "Do you regret any part of it?" She shook her head. "Not a second." There was no triumph in her voice, no prideful hum, just calm. "Grace," Luca said after a moment, "that was more than a gala." Sienna turned now, tilting her head. It was a reckoning. Across town, the Grand Bellezza's internal culture was undergoing its own transformation. The first mentorship session with Hart Foundation scholars was scheduled for that afternoon. The once intimidating conference room had been completely restructured. Round tables replaced the long, cold boardroom slab. Natural light flowed through open blinds. On each table, a handwritten welcome note from the staff. Cameron Boyd adjusted his collar and looked at his watch. He didn't feel nervous, not anymore. He felt responsible. The students began arriving, each one carrying not just potential, but a memory of being dismissed, of being told they didn't fit. Now they were being told they mattered. One of the young women, Delilah, walked in, clutching a small spiral notebook, and asked Boyd quietly, "Will we be allowed to ask questions or just listen?" He smiled. "You'll do more than ask. You'll teach us how to listen." She blinked, surprised, then smiled back. The shift had begun. Back at the Hart home, Diane arrived for a brief debriefing. She placed a few press clippings on the marble island in the kitchen. The headlines were glowing. "Sienna Hart redefines grace at Grand Bellezza. Philanthropist stuns with silent lesson in class. How a yacht and a simple dress changed everything." Sienna skimmed them, then gently slid them aside. "The real headline," she murmured, "is the one no paper will run." "What's that?" Diane asked. "That a girl walked into a room where no one thought she belonged, and didn't change herself. She changed the room." Diane smiled. "It's already happening. We've received over 500 new scholarship applications in less than 24 hours. "And the resort?" Luca asked, entering with a tablet. "They've booked us for next year. No press, just the students. Boyd offered the ballroom for free." Sienna nodded slowly. "Good. Let the silence speak louder this time." That afternoon, Sienna sat down to write. Not to a newspaper, not for a speech, to the girl she used to be. Dear you, I know today felt like the world reminded you of your place, that your clothes didn't fit the room, that your voice wasn't loud enough, that you were invisible. But I promise you, your presence is louder than you think. You don't need diamonds to be respected. You don't need a yacht to be seen. You need courage, the kind that lets you walk out of a room with your head high, even if no one claps. One day they'll call your silence strength, your humility grace, your resilience power. Keep walking, even when they turn you away. Especially then, because the world doesn't change when you wear their uniform. It changes when you walk in wearing your truth. Love, the woman you became. She sealed the letter and placed it in a drawer beside dozens of others just like it. She had written one after every milestone, every gala, every lesson. They weren't for public display. They were for her soul, for the part of her that never wanted to forget how it felt to be unseen. Because as much as the world wanted to define her by yachts and charity balls, she had never left behind the girl in the beige dress. She carried her, and that was her greatest wealth. As the sun began to set, Luca poured 2 glasses of wine and met Sienna on the balcony. They watched the horizon fade into hues of amber and lavender. You ready for what's next? He asked. Sienna sipped her wine and gave a small smile. I think the world is. That night, across homes and offices and hearts, the ripple continued. In the comment section of a viral video showing Sienna's speech, someone wrote she didn't raise her voice, but she raised the standard. Another replied, she didn't need revenge. Her grace was enough. And still another said, to every woman who's ever been dismissed, you're not alone and you're not finished. And somewhere, far from the coast, in a dusty thrift store, a young girl tried on a beige dress and turned to her mother. Do you think it's okay for the scholarship dinner? Her mother nodded, brushing the shoulder gently. Honey, you could wear a paper bag and still walk like you belong. The girl looked at her reflection and smiled, because she did. In a world where appearance too often determines respect, one woman reminded us all that true power doesn't need an announcement. Sienna Hart didn't raise her voice, demand retribution, or play into ego. She simply stood tall, walked in grace, and let her truth do the talking. To every person who's ever been judged before they had a chance to speak, this story is for you. If this moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, or made you see the world a little differently, subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and elevate. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Let your voice be heard, because like Sienna, you don't need to shout to be unforgettable.